I basically spent my entire time writing applications for lottery funding and doing feasibility studies on everything from swimming pool development, community centre, new synthetic turf pitch. And so you kind of learn and I'm working all over the UK as well. So you learn quite quickly all the kind of basics, putting a sports development plan as part of a submission. So all the different angles and kind of bringing all the different specialists and so on that you need to kind of be able to pull that information together. So it was, as I said, great training ground, and you kind of learned a lot very quickly. And then because it was the really early days of sports consultancy, one project leads to another, and suddenly you're going from working on a local lottery application to working on national stadium feasibility and planning project within a few years' time. And because it was just this emerging organisation, and you'll know this from kind of, that sort of startup.
From Coordinate Sport, it's The Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journeys. Our guest this episode is Helen Rowbotham, CEO of Access Sports. Helen identified early that a career in sports management was her focus, and upon graduating from Loughborough, she started her career in sports consultancy. She cut her teeth on both international and national projects as the sector grew. Now CEO of Access Sports, she's committed to establishing a new strategy that focuses on raising the profile of the charity and its drive for inclusion across all sports. During the episode, we hear about Helen's time in consultancy and reflect on the impact of the projects she worked on. We also discuss how the skills and experiences have shaped her approach to leading the charity today. Enjoy the show. I'm delighted to say we have Helen Rowbotham on the show today. She's CEO of Access Sport, the charity working to directly combat high levels of exclusion, hardship and poor health faced by millions of children in the UK. Welcome to the show, Helen.
Fantastic to be here, James.
Likewise. I know we're just having a chat, almost started before we started recording, to be fair. But like always, we want to give our listeners a bit more of a bit of insight into yourself and get to know you a little bit better. So we always start back in kind of childhood. And I noticed, obviously, when we were speaking to you beforehand, that you kind of set out to have a career in sport early on, right? So did that be from your childhood? Did you have a sporty childhood growing up? And that kind of sow the seeds, as you say?
Yeah, well, in terms of my childhood, initially grew up in Northern Ireland, then moved to Cheshire when I was about 6. And I guess at primary school, I wasn't particularly sporty, just did the basics that were there, netball, rounders in the summer, that type of stuff. So nothing special. And, my family was supportive of sport, but not like super sporty or anything. But then when I went to secondary school, I found out I could run. And that first term, I ended up running for my county, and I ended up in just getting into every single sports team there was at secondary school. And that's kind of really where I found sport. And just, it just right from the start came part of who I was, my identity at school, and it kind of all rolled from there.
It's
really
difficult, isn't it? I guess in support, especially secondary school, when you find your talent, it's like you kind of get labelled as a sporty one and maybe treated a little bit different by the PE staff for sure.
Yeah, there probably was a bit of that in the sense that if there's someone with a little bit of talent, I mean, in the scale of things, it wasn't that great a talent, but at the time, it just makes you sort of feel like you've got something you can bring to the mix. And, back in those days at my school, if you competed for your county, you got your photo taken and put up on a kind of massive frame in the dining hall at school, and a black and white photo in the local newspaper and things like that. So it kind of became part of your identity. But throughout secondary school, I was really lucky because I went to a normal state school. It happened to be a girls' state school in Sandbach in Cheshire, Sandbach High School, but it was also a dual-use leisure centre attached to my school. So we just had really good sports facilities compared to most of the local state schools. We had a swimming pool and a massive sports hall and, all this sort of stuff, which just wasn't normal back then. So it felt like it was all there, and you just had loads of these opportunities. We also had, in my year at school, loads of really sporty girls who we just created all these teams. So we had fantastic teams across a number of sports. And that, for me was a huge part of secondary school and something I really loved and just became my passion, and therefore something I wanted to do longer term as well.
Because I guess you got that confidence builder personally, like obviously for your own performance, but then if you've got the kind of the culture around you, like you said, a lot of teams and that culture across the school, that competing is a good thing, and team sports as well with all the camaraderie is brilliant. I guess with siblings, things like that, did you have much rivalry and competition there with in the family?
Yeah, I've actually got a twin sister and
so
an
definitely
elder
yes then.
sister as well. Yeah, so my elder sister was a brilliant hockey player at school. And my twin sister and I, really good at different sports. So we'd be in the same team, but, in hockey, she was always the kind of centre and, she was really full on in hockey and I'd be the wing running down the side. And same in netball, she was centre, I was goal shooter. And it was kind of, yes, we're in the teams together, but yeah, a little bit of competition, but we tended to be good, in athletics. She was the brilliant discus thrower and I was the runner. So we complemented each other quite well. Didn't compete too much. It was more sort of a team mentality.
Yeah. So obviously you've gone through school, like they said, sporty environment in school, and then off to university. And I guess we talked about they kind of knew you wanted to get into sport, but what was your mindset leaving school and making those choices? Obviously, always a difficult choice for people when they're leaving secondary school. But did you clearly have a choice of where you wanted to go, what you wanted to study, kind of that pathway?
Yeah, I guess when I was at school, I was like everybody, you're kind of looking through all these brochures and thinking, what on earth do I do? What direction do I go in? My dad has always been a businessman and I kind of liked the idea of doing management, but sport was my passion. So when I discovered that you could do sports management degree, that was where I really kind of thought, yeah, I'd really enjoy that. And I went off and visited different universities as you do, and went to visit Loughborough and just loved the whole kind of campus environment with all the sports facilities there. And I had in mind that that's where I really, really wanted to go. Unfortunately, it was really competitive to get into even back then. And I didn't quite get the points I needed because I didn't do well in one of my A-levels that I was expected to do better in. So I actually did a year of economics first, which I'd kind of got the points for, and kind of went through the back door slightly. Week one, literally, I think it was day 2 of arriving at Loughborough, I went to speak to the admissions tutor for the sports department and said, please, can I change? And he said, no, we're full, but come back
let me know if someone drops out. Right, I'm ready.
Yeah, get a 2-1 and then I'll consider you. So I ended up doing a year of economics and then swapping over. But actually, that's the best thing for me because, at that point, I hadn't got onto this course, which I'd set my mind onto. I thought I'd kind of failed, but it was actually my economics teacher at school who was like, there's another way to do this. You can get to Loughborough, you're good at economics, go that route. And actually, I think if that hadn't happened and I hadn't had that year and kind of knowing that different route, then I probably wouldn't have been as sort of dedicated and focused. And in some ways, that year was always a bit of like working out how university worked and, how to use the library and what expectations were. And also I had a lot of fun. So I made a fantastic group of friends who are still my best friends. And so, you can't regret these things.
Yeah, it's almost like maybe a bit more, not well-rounded, but you get that doing the 2 different subjects. I guess it's like that American approach, majoring in something at the end of it. Yeah, definitely. Graduating at the time, obviously you've done the sports management degree, did you know what the career path looked like? Did you have like and I'm going to talk about your time in consultancy and things like that, but did you know that was what you were planning on doing? Or was it just like any sports management? Was it professional side, NGB? What was the...
Yeah, so it was interesting actually. At the time, there was almost an expectation that you'd kind of go down the sort of leisure centre management route or go and become a PE teacher or something like that. And neither of those particularly appealed to me. And I was looking out, trying to work out what career options there were. My elder sister had gone into a job in management consultancy. She'd been the first kid from our school to go to Cambridge University and come out and joined a management consultancy. And I loved that idea. She was in the city in London. I thought, that's so cool, but how could I do that in sport? And I remember going to career service at the time and telling them what I wanted to do. And this was at Loughborough, the home of sport. And they were like, no, there's no careers. There's no such thing as sports management. But actually, what had happened is, during that time I was at university, the National Lottery had been launched. And suddenly, within a couple of years, and just as I was graduating, there was a lot of money going into community sport, and sports consultancy was just emerging as a new sector. There were a couple of small companies at the time. And there used to be, this is early days of the internet even. So trying to find out who's out there was quite hard. But there's a journal which is still around called Leisure Opportunities and Sports Management magazine. Yeah. And I literally kind of trawled this magazine thinking, what could I do? What are the career options here? And I saw an advert for a sports management consultancy, basically. And I was like, right, that's what I want to do. So I applied and sent letters off, as you did back then, to every single company I could find, and got one response for an interview. And I didn't get that job, but the person who interviewed me basically said, you should apply for this company, which was a new sports consultancy set up by my first boss, Peter Mann, and I ended up applying there. The person who'd got the other job was leaving there to join this company, and so I ended up filling their space. So it was really kind of them to redirect me, and I literally started the next week, I think, after the interview. So it's strange how these things happen, but I was determined, and I was like, any route into this is what I want to do. It was all down to the advert and leisure opportunities.
that must have been, I guess, not baptism of fire, but really strong learning experience. You like straight out of university with not that much experience, and then into kind of a startup, and also in kind of a not new sector, but kind of emerging sector with kind of the funding coming in, and a lot of organizations or clients needing advice and support in how to invest or how to spend the new funds that they've received.
Yeah, it was a colleague that I worked with at the time, Marcus Kinglow, was one of your recent interviewees. And indeed. So he was one of those first people when I joined that week. He was already there in the team. And it was just a brilliant training ground. And it's funny, I look back now and I think and there's a number of people I worked with back then over the coming years who are now in senior roles in the sector. And it's quite unusual to go straight into consultancy at the start of your career. Most people end up doing later on. But it was just brilliant training in kind of all the process and the strategic thinking and kind of how to approach a problem and solve it, how to bring groups of diverse people together, how to work with people from whole range of different backgrounds and experiences. So in that sense, it was kind of just, a fantastic way to learn the sector and industry and what was happening.
I feel like maybe a lot of research as well. It feels like there must have been a lot of research going on. And you mentioned early days of the internet. How was that difficult back then? I guess I'm just curious on how did you access the information? Was it,
I was reflecting on this the other day when I was chatting to somebody. I remember when I first started that job, literally one of my jobs was to print out the emails to our one email address and take them around the office to people. And I have to say, within a couple of months, we all had email addresses. That did change quickly. And, in terms of the sort of sport and sector information, which we all sort of know is online and everywhere, everyone can access everything now. It was really challenging. We had this directory in the office. I can't remember what it was called. We called it the banana book because it had yellow pages, but it listed all the sports facilities around the country. And that was often you're working with the local authority, you kind of go and work out what is in that area. So there was a lot of on the ground research, kind of go into the areas we're working with. And that first couple of years, I basically spent my entire time writing applications for lottery funding and doing feasibility studies on everything from swimming pool development, community centre, new synthetic turf pitch. And so you kind of learn and I'm working all over the UK as well. So you learn quite quickly all the kind of basics, putting a sports development plan as part of a submission. So all the different angles and kind of bringing all the different specialists and so on that you need to kind of be able to pull that information together. So it was that, as I said, great training ground, and you kind of learned a lot very quickly. And then because it was the really early days of sports consultancy, one project leads to another, and suddenly you're going from working on a local lottery application to working on national stadium feasibility and planning project within a few years' time. And because it was just this emerging organisation, and you'll know this from kind of, that sort of startup. If you're successful, then quite quickly the opportunities grow, and you just got to grasp every opportunity you can at that point, don't you? So
and I guess all those different experiences must have stood you well, like moving forward in your career. Obviously, all the different types of projects and seeing everything, and obviously getting the funding, etc., to bring it to fruition. I know. Obviously, the time at PMP Genesis, you moved on to, is it CSM? The next
that's right.
And I'm just looking at the list of projects and stuff you're involved in. Huge range, Commonwealth Games, Olympic bids, Cricket World Cups, all those things. Is there any that kind of stand out as, stand up for in a good way or a bad way? I guess.
Yeah. I've been really lucky. I've worked on some amazing projects in the UK and internationally. I guess the ones where, that sense of pride that you get from it is where you see the outcomes at the end of the day. And so one of the first, really large-scale international project I worked on was Singapore Sports Hub. So if you go to Singapore now, the Sports Hub's just this amazing facility with all sorts of different sports included there and lots of additional facilities around it. I was there when they had the old National Stadium, and I was the sports advisor in PwC's team. They didn't have a sports team at the time. And I remember going over with my boss at the time. He stayed for a few days and then left me there for a month and a half, basically to consult with every sports organisation and work out what on earth needed to be in this new version of the National Stadium. We created the name Singapore Sports Hub, and, the rest is history. I mean, that was that first piece of work. There was, of course, all the architects and financial advisors, but, it feels quite satisfying, having been there from day one, to have been a tiny cog in obviously a huge project. But when I went back to Singapore and you saw it all up and running, that's pretty satisfying.
Yeah, I guess that grassroots, I know you said a small part, but I guess the grassroots engagement, so you were literally engaging with all the organisations, understanding, I guess, letting them moan at you and tell you what's wrong and what's right at the moment. I guess having that as a core part of the project, I guess, is one of the keys to success, right? If people weren't bought into it, especially on the grassroots.
That's it. Speaking to all of the national federations, the national governing bodies, as we call them, speaking to the international federations, speaking to all the major events rights holders, what could work here, from both a practical perspective of what they need, but also from a sort of financial perspective as well. And so it's all that knitting together and creating a solution. And one of the great things you learn from, those early days of consultancy, of course, you go into a project like that and think, gosh, how do I know the answer to this? But if you're a good consultant and you know that if you follow a process, you'll find a solution. There's always a solution. And normally the solution actually is really simple at the end of the day, but sometimes getting to that simple solution is quite hard work.
Yeah, I guess a lot of the time, maybe it's that independent person there who can, there's no baggage there, is there, in terms of the conversation that you're having and stuff. So that's it. But
that was obviously a fantastic project. There were loads of others. I really enjoyed working on Commonwealth Games up in Glasgow, worked with a whole range of partners up there on the early feasibility work for the Commonwealth Games. Obviously, the city had kind of done their sort of first headline feasibility work, and then they needed to have a whole independent review. So I had a whole team that I pulled together where we basically went in and interrogated and developed and shaped that feasibility work. And then obviously to then attend the Commonwealth Games a few years later, and I went on to do further work for the Commonwealth Games Federation. And, I think it's those projects where you see them come to fruition. And that was true even of some of those really early projects where, that was funding for a local community sports centre, which is now up and running, and those are at the heart of the community. So it's just really nice seeing stuff come out of the ground and stuff happen. Yeah,
seeing the longevity and the impact. I'm curious in terms of, obviously, you're working with all those different types of stakeholders, and then you've moved into kind of British rowing and the NGB side. Was that something that when you were consulting and working with different partners, did you think, I want to try my hand at NGBs and see if I can make a difference there, or how did that go?
Yeah, it was a funny one actually, how it came about, because I kind of been in consultancy for quite a long time at that point, over 20 years. And I kind of felt that I'd been there and done that with consultancy. It is kind of, most people do it later on rather than at the start. And also I felt that I really wanted to show that I could practice what I preached. Often in consultancy, you're advising people and you're not actually having to do it. And there is a sense of, if you were actually having to do it, would you be offering the same advice? And I kind of wanted to show that, no, I could do more than just write a report and tell people what they should be doing. I could actually do it myself. But actually, and I always felt if I was going to kind of move into either consultancy, management consultancy or sport, I was definitely more on the sports side. And so I was really looking for opportunities, but there isn't a sort of traditional role in governing body world that suits, your traditional management consultant. So when the role of Director of Innovation came up at British Rowing, despite having never rowed in my life, I just thought Director of Innovation sounds really interesting and quite unusual for what would be seen as quite a traditional governing body. And when I explored it further, they really wanted somebody who had broad cross-sport experience. And in some ways, it was a bit like a in-house consultancy type role, because I had a remit to essentially come in and deliver new projects and initiatives to help them deliver on the new strategy that we had, which is all about opening up the sport and making it more sustainable. So I kind of approached it with that management consultancy mindset, and I had a blank sheet of paper, really supportive team and chief exec. And yeah, so it was a fantastic transition. And as you can see behind me,
I was going to mention it.
Yeah, I've got sucked in. I've got the indoor rowing machine. My daughter's now started rowing, actually. So the legacy of me working at British Rowing is me doing a bit of indoor rowing and my daughter now being rowing, because I think it's a brilliant sport and I was really keen that my kids get involved in it. But yeah, that's how I got into that role.
I guess at that time as well, and I don't know what the landscape looked like in terms of those roles, like innovation, etc. But it's pretty forward thinking, I suppose, and for the board or the trustees to think, yeah, we want to make this work, but we're not sure how. Like, we know that we know the vision, but we're not sure how. And being that transparent and open to bring someone in, I guess that's quite a forward-thinking organisation.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Anna-Marie Phelps was chair at the time and had overseen the sort of development of this new strategy. The organisation had gone through a modernisation process, bringing a whole new director team in and really sort of trying to broaden the breadth of activities, and also from a sort of diversity and inclusion perspective, looking at how would really open up the sport. And I think it was the first director of innovation role within a governing body, actually. I think others quickly followed, and there were a number that then suddenly came out of the woodwork.
Yeah, what are they doing over there at Rowan? Let's try that.
Yeah. And it was definitely that time where there were directors of innovation popping up all over the place. And of course, what is a director of innovation? It's all dependent upon the organisation you're in, because innovation is a bit of a spectrum, to be quite frank. We weren't Apple, but actually there's, the kind of really innovative stuff that's completely new and different. But a lot of it is looking at how you bring best practice from the wider sector into a traditional sport, how you look to reshape the offer, looking for other things that are working well elsewhere, kind of adjacent innovation in terms of what can you buy into and extend the work that you're doing. And it was a really interesting time. I'm really proud of the work that I did at British Rowing, and I ended up actually just before COVID taking on the role of director of rowing community, which is probably the first time a non-rower has had that role. And I guess I knew that I was not going to be there forever in that role, because rowing was not my sport, but it was a fantastic opportunity. I loved working with the rowing community. It is a brilliant sport, and we just delivered some fantastic projects. But then it was time for me to take on a new challenge after that.
Yeah, definitely. So like towards the end of last year, I think you took on the role at Access Sport. I guess it's probably a good time for the listeners as well to give us a bit of a synopsis in terms of the charity and maybe model and the goals and stuff like that, just so we get a really good feel of it.
So Access Sport was actually formed in 2004. So it's been around quite some time and has grown organically since then. It was set up by a group of sports marketeers. Charlie Beauchamp, who was one of those founders at the time, he actually now works at Chime, where I used to work. So it's a small world, very much set up to fill like what they saw as a gap in the sector in terms of supporting the development of inclusive sporting offers. And essentially, we believe that no one should be excluded from the transformational benefits of community sport. And for us, those around physical and mental health and well-being, personal development, so life skills and life prospects, sense of belonging and community engagement. And those four things cover every project that we work on in every programme. So, in terms of how we do that, our mission, it's about making inclusion the norm, tackling barriers to access. And we focus on disadvantaged and disabled children and young people. That is our sole focus. And in terms of how we do all of that, it's by training, equipping and supporting community sports clubs, organisations and volunteers to provide inclusive programmes. So it's very much about empowering local community organisations to provide inclusive offers. And our big focus has always been on existing community sports and organisations and helping them to be accessible. And so, it's just, I can say this because I'm fairly new, it's a brilliant charity who just do fantastic work, and it's grown over time. And I've come in very much with a growth remit to look at how we build upon the fantastic work that's happening. I think we've got a brilliant product. If I kind of look at this from a business perspective,
I was going to say, are you still in kind of what would you? I don't know how you term it. This discovery phase as a consultant coming in, like quite last first 6 months, I guess, in the role. Is it trying to understand and
there's definitely an element to that. I think the benefit of my consultancy time is that discovery phase has to be pretty short. And because if you come in as a consultant, you don't have 100 days to do your discovery. You've got 100 days to deliver the outputs typically. So So I kind of was able to come in quite quickly and really try to get to grasp with the, what's happening that's good, where can we make improvements? And really, as I said, the work that we do, everybody that we work with just loves the work that we do. All of our partners, all the participants, the clubs that we support. The challenge is how we can support more organisations and ultimately support more young people by expanding our offer.
Yeah, and obviously funding is always difficult in every organisation, commercial or third sector. What's the makeup of that for Access Sport? Is it 100% funded, or do you income generate? How do you make it all work?
It's a mixed funding model, which I think is good in this day and age because we can't really rely on any single source. We do get some public sector funding via Sport England, and at the moment we've got, while they're kind of going through a lot of restructure, we've got a year of funding and then we'll be going through a new long-term funding process for them. We also get a lot of support from London Marathon Charitable Trust, who've been a fantastic partner. And then we do a lot of fundraising. So we work with a lot of trusts and foundations. We apply for a lot of funding. We've got a number of corporate partners. We just launched and announced earlier this year a new partnership with Nuffield Health. They're initially supporting our project work in Manchester by helping us grow our team up there. And we do events and all sorts to bring to the mix. I was actually just last night a SAPCA, Sports and Play Construction Association dinner. They were fundraising for us as their charity partner. And so, it's a real mixed model, but it's really important that we are always looking at those different opportunities because, it changes over time and some income streams will increase and others will reduce. And, we're very much looking to grow our corporate support in terms of our fundraising, and that's a key focus for us. We feel like we've got a really strong offer to support corporates that want to demonstrate their commitment to EDI and really have an impact upon local communities in which they're based.
Touching on that impact, I'm really curious if you could expand a little bit on the BMX project, because I love the sound of it and our listeners will be interested on that one for sure.
Yeah, so I guess just in headline terms, all of our work falls into two main programmes. We've got Changing Places, which is our place-based multi-sport. So we have teams on the ground. The main teams are Bristol, London, Manchester, Oxford, and we're expanding into Sheffield as well. And essentially we've got teams who work across all types of sports. So that's kind of Changing Places. We're looking to expand to new locations with that programme. And then we've got Changing Sport, and we basically create inclusive offers with a focus on social and disability inclusion within particular sports. Often they've come out of our Changing Places work where we started to work with a local club and created a great offer, and then it expands and rolls out from there. Cycling is the sport where we've probably got our most developed of our Changing Sport programmes. Cycling is a fantastic sport for us because, of course, it's a life skill, which, everybody benefits, but all of the additional benefits of cycling clubs and inclusive clubs, there's so much opportunity there. And so over the years, we've developed this niche within BMX pump track development, and we've now created, amazingly, 20-odd pump tracks around the country. Just 2 weeks ago, we launched a new pump track in Stockwood in Bristol. We've got 2 more opening this year in London and Sheffield. And, these are fantastic open access facilities in the heart of the most deprived communities where there are no other facilities of these nature. And what we do, we don't just build the facilities because that is not our approach. We're all about sustainability. So where existing clubs don't exist, we continue to work in those communities. We create and shape and support local community cycling clubs. We have storage containers at the pump tracks filled with bikes, helmets, all the equipment. So not having a bike isn't a barrier to access. And, these facilities are fantastic. The kids use them all the time, before, after school, the weekends. You can use them on scooters. So you'll see little kids on scooters on them alongside your amazing BMX riders who are doing tricks and all sorts. And they just become the heart of the community that they're in. And then once you've got a club up and running, and we run we put coaches on site and run outreach programs for local schools and just really activate them. I mean, this is one of the big challenges around the country. We have so many community facilities which are built, but they're not activated. And unless you activate them and create them, make them and shape them into community hubs, then you're not going to get all those benefits that everybody expects from it. You can't just kind of throw money at a facility and then leave it. You've got to activate it and make it happen. That's
that challenge, I think, because you always think back, it used to be, obviously, kids used to step out in the street and kind of make their own way kind of thing, just go out and play. And then now, when we didn't have the facilities, now we do have them. Maybe it feels like, yeah, that's a professional facility. I need to know how to use it rather than just jump on there and get into it.
Yeah, this is a brilliant statistic from one of the projects in Bristol. So basically the police assess incidents of antisocial behaviour, and there's sort of two areas they look at, which are right next to one of the sites that we built. And year on year, from the development of the pump track, antisocial behaviour incidents reduced by 45% and then 60% on the other site, year on year. And they obviously aligned it to development of the site because there's something for young people to do. And they care about it, and it's at the heart of the community, and there's that sense of belonging, that sense of, ownership. So if you've got something to do, you're not going to kind of go off and do all the other stuff you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and obviously you've got that ownership of the facility, not going to damage it or because it's something positive, valuable to you.
Absolutely.
Also, is that like a joint funding model to get that built? So are you working with local authorities or private partners to develop? To do the development of this project? So
in that particular, Stockwood, I use that as an example, that was launched a couple of weeks ago. So the primary funding partner on that was London Marathon Charitable Trust. And then having that core funding allows us to release funding from other partners. So Bristol City Council put some funding in. We were able to raise funding locally from trusts and foundations, because when they know there's that core funding, it's much easier to get that next level of funding. And then we do a lot of work with local corporates and other partners to buy the bikes, buy the storage containers, all of those, what seem like smaller elements, but are really critical. And now we continue to do fundraising. We have a fundraising committee in Bristol, which is focused on bringing in funding to support ongoing coaching and development of that club and getting it up and running. And, so it's early days there. And so the model's slightly different depending upon where we're working and the different partners. Sport England have also been a fantastic supporter from a capital funding perspective over the years on those projects. But cycling continues to be a really important part of our work, but we work across a number of other sports as well. I mean, cycling, we have 65 inclusive cycling clubs that are now part of our cycling network. We've also got 50 hockey clubs that have disability inclusive hockey programs, just as an example. So we can take the learnings from these different sports and effectively create new offers. And what we'd be seeing is quite traditional sports, but that sort of real grassroots first step in, which doesn't normally exist within those sports at the moment.
Yeah, still innovating with the innovation hat on. I guess you come in with that growth remit. What's your, vision 3 to 5 years out? Is it kind of geographical expansion more or more projects? What's the North Star for you?
Yeah, a bit of both. So we've got, if I use our sort of two main programs, so Changing Places, we do want to expand to new cities where there's a gap for what we do. So we're not going to go in and replicate. There are other partner organisations, and if actually the active partnerships in a particular area and local authorities are really active, then there isn't a need for what we do. But in many cities, there is still a key gap within the communities who need our support the most. And so where we identify those gaps, we'll go in and work with partners in those areas to create new offers. So there's that plan to expand our Changing Places project. We're talking to lots of active partnerships at the moment, for example, to understand, where are the gaps? Particularly, and I would say there's more gaps around disability inclusion offers. A lot of the kind of local authorities and active partnerships have been more focused on sort of social inclusion generally. So it's great to see some strides in that space. But, most of our work ends up being a combination of social inclusion and disability inclusion. And then under Changing Sport, having come from a governing body, it's lovely to think that governing bodies are able to kind of provide everything across their sports. But the reality is, running a governing body, it's the most complex business model in the world. You've got 20 objectives. If you speak to anybody in a governing body, they're all equally important or right up there. And often the reality is that despite the best intentions and plans and everything else, there are not sufficient resources to really throw into social inclusion and disability inclusion office to the level that the governing bodies would want to to see. So what we are able to do is bring our expertise and, our team of delivery experts to work with governing bodies, or often we've done things, out with the NGB model, but ended up working with them over time to create offers within those sports where they just don't exist. And, I think hockey is a good example of that, where, it starts off with one club, which, slowly revolves. And now we have 50 odd, what we call the Flyers hockey clubs, which is kind of disability inclusive programs within hockey clubs, where you've got young kids and young people participating with their siblings and their parents. And it's that real first step, grassroots, just loving sport and enjoying being part of a community club. And, if you speak to the parents at these sessions, they'll say that this is the only session and activity that they can find where they can participate as a family, which actually is fully inclusive. Children often who have quite different impairments and different needs can take part in, and it's literally often the only thing they've been able to find that really works for them. And that's crazy in this day and age. Everybody should be able to access different community sports offers. So what I would love to see is every community club having that fully inclusive offer alongside, a traditional Colts type offer. But that, that inevitably that's always going to kind of be down that competitive, technical, skill development route. So creating an offer that kind of sits alongside that just says, actually, this is the first step in. And some of the kids that join our programs will naturally go on to those kind of Colts programs because they can, but others will just always love being part of Flyers, and that's what it's all about. So, we're working across a number of sports, and at the moment, we're actually working with a number of governing bodies on the creation of offers within their sport. We're already working with tennis, LTA, and looking to expand the tennis offer. We've been doing a lot of work around cricket and are looking to expand that, working with the ECB. And we've also, another one that we're looking at expanding is around rugby, where we've done work, again, just up in Manchester, for example, with a rugby club. And there's clearly an opportunity there to do more. So we're working with the RFL and other partners to look at how could we potentially expand this and create a programme. There's just huge opportunity there. It all comes down to funding, James, at the end of the day. We can scale up because we've kind of got a core model that works, but it all depends on funding and supporters and kind of bringing all the elements together.
And I guess switching gears a little bit in terms of your personal approach, so much experience, loads of different organisations you've worked with, and you've probably seen loads of different management styles and seen them work, and good ones, bad ones, etc. What have you taken from that, or maybe what have you developed for yourself? Do you have like a certain approach to running obviously leading the organisation?
Yeah, I think, I've learned different things from different people over the years, both leaders in organisations I've worked with, but also clients. And quite frank, every day I'm working with amazing people who work in the sports sector, many of whom you have interviewed. And, there's loads of people out there that inspire me, and I kind of can learn from everybody. And I feel like I'm always learning. But I guess in terms of my approach, I've come into this role with a view that my job is to support the Access Sport team to deliver on our objectives. And the way I can best do that is to have a really clear vision and strategy and help drive the team together to work towards that, to bring everybody on board with that and to make it a real focus and embedded within everything we do. So that really kind of laser focus on what we're good at, not trying to do everything, but actually that this is what we're good at. Let's focus on that and do more of it, which is what we want to do. And I guess, obviously linked to that is supporting the team to be the best that they can be, both individually and collectively. So, I probably haven't always been great at that in every job I've ever had, but you learn over time. And actually, I take great pride now in how do I support what is actually, quite a young team within Access Sport, but to grow and develop their skills and their confidence. They're just amazing at what they do. So how do I help them to, do more of that and to take it forward? And then, of course, naturally, as chief exec, it's the mechanics of running an organisation, and just actually how do you make sure you're running a tight ship and that everything's tight. And that takes time because you can't do everything overnight. So you've got to work out your priorities and focus on those. So what's going to make the biggest change? And then, over time, you can address kind of the wider process things. And it's interesting with an organisation like ours, which has grown organically over time. Naturally, all organisations go through that sort of transition, don't they? Of
some of those legacy systems still in place.
Yeah, exactly. You just got to recognise at different times there's that kind of step change in approach, and how do you reshape, take an organisation that was fit for purpose at time, but actually times have changed. So how do we move on, and what do we need to shift, and what don't we need to shift? What works well?
Exactly, and what does it look like in 5 years?
Absolutely.
We normally ask about kind of performance routines and things like that, the habits that you do. And obviously, we talked about the rowing machine. So is that something you use as a stress releaser or to stay on top performance? Is there anything that you do kind of daily to kind of keep you focused there?
Yeah, look, I'm a very busy mum of two working full time, so I can't pretend that I have a perfect routine every day. Exactly. But I'm one of those people who over the years dips in and out of different sports. I've always been active. When I was at British Rowing, I really got into my triathlon. I bought a bike to cycle to work, and suddenly I thought, I can take up triathlon, I can run, I can cycle, let's learn to swim. At the moment, I'm into my CrossFit and I still run. I only took up CrossFit last year and I love the community side of it. I'm still terrible at it, but at least I understand the instructions now. But, I think, yes, you've got to have something. I like keeping fit, but I also like trying out new things and learning new things, and I don't have to be particularly good at everything. I just have to throw myself into it. But
yeah, exactly. Always learning as well. It's always good to have a new skill to learn. Exactly. A final question for me, it's a reflective one we always ask, and it's if you could look back on, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self and give yourself one little piece of advice, what would that be? If you could, let's think maybe leaving university, that type of age, before you start out in your career, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Yeah, don't stress.
That's a good one.
I think, it's quite interesting. I did not think at the start of my career I would necessarily be in this particular role now. I've always loved sport. And I'm one of those weird people that's probably enjoyed every single job I've ever had, to be honest, because I kind of love just throwing myself into something and enjoying it. But I have also learned over the years that stress doesn't get you anywhere, and actually to relax and actually enjoy the process and learn as you go. And one thing leads to another. So yeah, you don't have to know what that end goal is all the time. Just know that you're passionate about what you do. I think that's really important in life. I'm one of the few people I know who has always enjoyed their work, because whatever you're doing day to day, you've got that focus, passion for what you do, and that purpose. And more so now than ever, of course, in terms of purpose. And that's something that I didn't necessarily have that sense of purpose in my job in my early career. I was just doing the best I could do. And over time, I think, and maybe it's an age thing as well, kind of that sense of purpose in what you do becomes more and more important. When you are a busy person, when you have kids, and if you're going to be working hard, you want to feel like you're doing something really purposeful. But you don't have to have that in your first job. It will come with time and you can work it out from there.
Brilliant. I love that, Helen. Helen, thanks so much for your time, and I really appreciate all of your insights today.
Brilliant. Great to speak to you, James. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.